Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a close look at some really fascinating and honestly maybe a bit unsettling predictions about Poland's near future.
Sounds intriguing. What's the source material for this?
Well, it comes from excerpts of a YouTube video posted just recently, late May 2025. And in it, the speaker, who identifies as a clairvoyant,
Okay.
he revisits and talks more about visions he says he had way back on September 23rd, 2024.
So he's looking back, what, 8 months later?
Mm.
At predictions made before a lot of things were clear, like the presidential race.
Exactly. That time lag is interesting. And the focus of these visions, as he lays them out in this recent video, it's pretty broad, covers the 2025 Polish presidential election.
Right.
The war in Ukraine, obviously the stability of Poland's government right now, what he sees as external influences.
Big topic there.
Yeah, huge. And he even touches on economic forecasts.
Wow. Okay, so it's quite a mix. He's clearly connecting dots between all these areas.
Yeah, that's definitely the impression. He sees them as fundamentally linked. So our mission here, in this deep dive, is to sort of unpack the key bits of information he puts forward.
Understand what he thinks is important from those visions.
Right, and explore the connections he draws between things that might seem separate, like the election, and, say, the war escalating.
Okay, let's get into it. Where does he start? What's the overarching feeling?
Okay, let's unpack this. The main feeling, the sort of constant thread in the video, is his sense that Poland is in a very dangerous moment right now.
Dangerous how?
Mainly, he says, because of these intense external pressures he perceives. He starts with this idea that forces outside Poland have huge influence.
On the country itself and on its politicians.
Exactly. He feels Poland is, actively being divided, or starting to be, by these specific influences.
Not just general global politics, but specific players.
Yes, he's very clear on that. He feels strongly that Poland is, quote, within the reach of two external influences. He says one is from Europe.
Europe generally, or...
Yep. No, he specifies not the whole EU, but coming from the west of Poland. And the other is from the United States. And he describes both as strong.
Okay, so his view is a specific tug of war, parts of Europe, maybe Germany, he implies, versus the U.S. playing out inside Poland.
That's precisely how he frames it. And he continues, saying Polish politicians are very entangled in this.
And entangled, meaning working for one side or the other.
Essentially, yeah. He sees them engaged in a, quote, life and death struggle for dominance, serving one power or the other. It's a time of final tearing apart, he says. If one influence wins, the other loses its sway, definitely.
That's a really dramatic take on Polish politics. Less about internal debate, more like a proxy battle.
It is. Very stark. And he even suggests a potential consequence if one side, say the European influence, loses completely.
What then?
The country in Europe that loses that influence might actually close the border with Poland.
Close the border. Wow.
He says not out of anger, exactly, but just as a consequence of losing its political pull inside Poland. He even wonders, if Poles might need, permission to cross that border eventually.
That is a very specific, concrete prediction. And it really hammers home his whole point about sovereignty being compromised, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If politicians are seen as serving foreign interests, where does that leave the nation? That seems to be his core concern.
So this theme of external influence, how does he connect it to the upcoming presidential election?
Right, so that brings him to the election. He looks back at his prediction from September 2024. This was, before the candidates were really set.
Yeah, I remember there was early talk about Trzaskowski, maybe Sikorsky for PO, Zarnik for PS, names were floating around.
Exactly. And his core prediction back then, in September, was that among whoever the candidates ended up being, there'd be a very strange man.
Strange how?
And a very strong figure who would appear suddenly.
Ah.
And this person would be elected.
Okay, a sudden appearance, strong figure, elected. Did he say more about this person?
Yeah, he felt this candidate would come in with a plan that will have to be realized. And this plan, he said, it looks like betrayal and would mislead polls.
So not just predicting a winner, but the nature of the winner and the impact. That's quite detailed for a prediction made so far in advance.
It is. He described this person as appearing out of nowhere in politics before the election. Somber, he said, but very concrete. And somehow, despite needing very careful attention, this figure would gain significant public trust.
Appearing from nowhere, somber, concrete, gains trust. How does he link that old prediction to what's happening now in May 2025.
Well, he points to Nawrocki. He identifies Nawrocki as someone who, in his view, fits that description.
Yeah.
Someone who did appear relatively suddenly and has gained support since that September vision.
Right, so applying the vision directly to a current political figure.
And he gives his take on the current situation around Nawrocki. He feels the attacks against him are, quote, exaggerated.
Exaggerated attacks.
And he suggests this might actually backfire, that it could be helping Nawrocki gain votes, human nature, people reacting against perceived unfairness.
Interesting. The opposition's strategy, potentially boosting the very candidate he predicted would rise suddenly.
That's his perspective, yeah. He's also pretty critical of the main parties, PO and PiS. He feels their candidates aren't ideal because they just represent these systems that have been ruling for too long.
So a missed chance for real change in his eyes.
That seems to be the implication, like the election is just a choice between the PiS system or the PO system, neither of which he thinks is good for Poland.
Okay, and does he bring the external influence theme back in here?
Oh, absolutely. This is where it gets really interesting. He explicitly says he sees the election outcome being heavily influenced by those external powers he mentioned.
How so?
He believes the U.S. seems more for Nawrocki, while Europe, specifically Germany, he implies, is for Trzaskowski.
Wow. So it's not just background influence. He's saying it's a direct fight between countries over who gets to be the next Polish president, according to the source, of course.
Exactly how he frames it, a fight between countries. And he asks, what about Poland's sovereignty if that's the case? If the choice is really being made in Washington or Berlin, not by Polish voters.
That definitely ties back into his main concern about Poland being caught in the middle, a sort of battleground for these bigger forces. The election is just one arena for that fight, in his view.
Precisely. And interestingly, he sees the government's own stability as part of this whole picture, too. Not separate at all. He makes a pretty startling prediction about the current ruling coalition.
Another prediction about internal politics. But I guess he connects it back to those external forces again.
You got it. He predicts there'll be an attempt to overthrow the current government this summer.
Overthrow. Like bring it down.
Yeah. He feels this attempt will come very close to happening, or maybe even actually cause the government to fall.
Okay, an attempt to destabilize the coalition. And where does he think this push will come from?
This is the really surprising bit. He feels the impetus, the push for this, will come politically from the United States.
From the U.S.
Yeah, he sees it as a tactic, specifically aimed at bringing down the current government.
Wow. A U.S. political maneuver aimed at changing the government in Poland. I mean, that's a bold claim from this source.
It really is. He even suggests a time frame, possibly September or October, for this attempt, and he describes how it might happen through the compromise of someone. He says a coalition partner will leave the government, making it lose its majority.
So it would look like an internal political breakdown.
Right, like a coalition partner just deciding to walk away.
But he sees it as orchestrated from the outside.
That's exactly his point. He describes this partner's move as a play, acting, quote, under the dictation of some services, working to overthrow the government.
This really deepens his whole narrative, doesn't it?
Yeah.
External forces using internal political actors, essentially pulling the strings to achieve their goals. It's not just influence, it's active intervention in his view.
Yeah, it's a consistent theme. So moving from these internal political predictions, which he connects to external forces, he then turns to, well, an even more volatile area, the war in Ukraine.
Right, another critical zone where global powers are deeply involved. What does he see there?
He talks about the recent decision, by Germany, the UK, France, the US, to lift restrictions on Ukraine using long-range weapons against targets inside Russia.
Yeah, that was a significant shift in policy. We all saw that.
His prediction here is that Ukraine will use this new capability, but specifically for, quote, concrete provocation against Russia.
Provocation, meaning?
He sees them stepping up attacks specifically designed to anger Putin, to provoke Russia into taking actions beyond Ukraine's borders.
A calculated move, trying to force a specific Russian reaction.
That's how he sees it. And he gets quite specific. He foresees Ukraine launching several such attacks over a short time, maybe every 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
And among these, he says, there will be one very tragic bombardment at night, hitting something like a hostel or a hotel.
Oh, wow.
Resulting in a significant number of people losing their lives. He suggests maybe military personnel.
That's a remarkably grim and specific detail he's claiming to see.
It is. And he predicts Russia's response. He says it'll come with no warning. And the first response
Will it be directed?
towards the UK, he believes.
The UK, not Ukraine.
Towards the UK, but maybe not causing damage on land. He suggests it could be a show of force, like firing rockets that explode in British territorial waters.
Ah, okay. So a military response, but maybe symbolic, a warning shot.
Yeah, serving as a first military response, as he puts it, targeting a key European backer of Ukraine.
It fits his pattern, doesn't it? Seeing these events through the lens of these bigger power dynamics.
Absolutely. He also shares his belief that some European countries are already undertaking tactical actions against Russia through Ukraine, right now.
Tactical actions.
He feels this suggests the underlying decision is more far-reaching than just sending weapons. He thinks it could involve these countries actually joining the conflict if needed.
So not just arming Ukraine, but potentially preparing for direct involvement.
Yes, he calls this potential escalation the second phase of the war.
Okay, so lifting weapon restrictions isn't just a standalone thing for him. He sees it as part of a potential pathway to direct Western military involvement.
He then gives a specific time frame. He links the period around June 2022 with very serious talk about war with Russia.
June 20th to 22nd.
Yeah, predicting a noticeable shift in the public conversation, the political talk around then.
A very specific window he's highlighting there. Interesting.
He also brings up that comment by a U.S. general, the one mentioning Poland potentially being part of a contingent in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, I remember that caused a stir. In the context of a peace deal, wasn't it?
Right.
And Polish politicians quickly denied it.
Exactly. He notes that denial. And he sees it as, well, basically a cover-up.
A cover-up. Why?
Because, in his view, confirming anything like that during the presidential election campaign would be political suicide. Candidates would lose huge support if people thought Polish troops might be sent.
Ah, so linking the political calculations of the election directly to how information about potential military involvement is managed or suppressed.
Right. And he predicts this whole situation will change diametrically after the election.
How so?
Poland could then face the prospect of defending its position in Europe more directly, because he sees Russia as a threat not just to Ukraine, but explicitly to Poland and other European nations too.
So according to this source, the election is like a temporary pause or maybe a distraction from a looming security threat that Poland will have to face head-on afterwards.
That's the picture he paints. And then finally, he adds one more layer to all this complexity, the economy. He predicts a looming economic crash, or cratch, as he calls it.
Okay, so we've had politics, geopolitics, war. Now the economy gets pulled into this web too.
Right. He predicts this crash is likely, maybe even much probable, in the second half of this year.
Does he link the timing to anything?
Yes. He says it depends on the international situation and, interestingly, the actions of China.
Ah, China. So
Yeah.
connecting Poland's economic fate, or the world's maybe, directly to major global players and what they do.
Exactly. And he views this coming crash not just as, a market downturn. He sees it as a form of hybrid warfare.
Hybrid warfare.
Specifically an economic war between America and China. He describes it as far-reaching. And this connects back to things he's apparently said before about belief in the dollar increasingly falling.
I see. So even the economic prediction isn't isolated in his mind. It's just another battlefield in this larger global competition he keeps talking about. It's all interconnected.
That's precisely it. He feels this economic tension cannot continue for long and will have repercussions quite quickly. He seems quite certain this crash will happen this year.
So putting it all together, what's the takeaway from this deep dive into his predictions?
Well, what it really seems to mean, when you look at everything he's laid out, is this consistent picture of Poland caught right in the middle of intense external pressures and global power struggles.
Yeah, he sees these outside forces influencing pretty much everything, doesn't he? From who wins the election to whether the government stays standing, right up to the, very real risks of the war next door escalating and potentially pulling Poland in directly.
And then layered underneath all that political and geopolitical tension, you've got this prediction of a major economic shockwave. And even that isn't just seen as a market thing, but as a deliberate act of economic war between global giants.
It's definitely a perspective that views all these different crises, political, military, economic, waiting, not as separate problems, but as like interconnected fronts in these larger global dynamics, with Poland somehow being a real focal point or maybe a battleground for it all.
I think the speaker's core concern, really, when you boil it down, seems to be about Poland's sovereignty. a perceived lack of genuine sovereignty.
because of the politicians being so entangled, as he put it, in the plans of these foreign powers.
Exactly. Leading, in his view, to a loss of real agency for the nation itself, regardless of, marches or protests.
It's certainly a dramatic vision he presents, a country whose future feels like it's being shaped more by hands from the outside than by choices made at home.
Which I suppose raises a pretty important question for you, listening to this, to think about. In a world where external influences, like the ones described in the source material, are seen as so powerful and so deeply tangled up with what happens domestically, how much control do nations, any nation really truly have over their own destiny?